So thanks everyone for coming again. I'm Peggy from Activity Hero. Thank you for coming. We have Dr. Sandee McClowry with us today. She is a distinguished professor at NYU. She has all sorts of other accomplishments I'll let her explain to all of us. And we wanted to bring up this important topic about race and equality. And Dr. Sandee was kind enough to create special curriculum just for us. And so I feel really privileged that she's spending her time with us today and that all of you have chosen to invest time into making change, because this is what we all believe, those of us here, is that it's very important for us to change and be part of that change. So as part of that, Activity Hero this week has been featuring Black-owned classes and camps. You know, of course, this is not just just special for this week, but this is something that we believe is going to be ongoing. Folks who want to support specifically Black-owned businesses, we have a spotlight page that I'll put into the chat that you can specifically look and support. You know, all of them offer online courses, so it's possible for you to take them from anywhere. And we are also doing some grants, some service grants, so that they can use Activity Hero services at no cost. So we are doing this because we believe that in order to make change, we have to be part of it, and that what better way to make some change than to make some very successful businesses. So that's our personal goal. So without further ado, let me introduce Dr. Sandee McClowry.
Thanks, Peggy. Great. I'm Dr. Sandee McClowry, as Peggy said, known to children more likely as Dr. Sandee. I am pleased to see you here today, and because we're a small group, I thought this would be a time when we would have as much discussion as hearing from me. So I commend all of you for joining us, and I look forward to our discussions. So let me move to our next, to some of our slides. Sorry, as a professor, there's just no way I can talk without having slides. Oops. Not going to next slide. Yeah. So why are we here today? You're here, I would expect, because you care and you understand the importance of this topic. Currently, 1 out of 10 kids is biracial, and we know from the last few months that at least we hope that the world has changed, and you want to be part of helping the world respond differently than we have in the past. I have had some experience in the Black community. I've worked in it most of my career in schools where we've done the Insights program. I also was in Jamaica for a year as a Fulbright scholar because they asked me to bring my program to Jamaica. And so I had a little bit of an opportunity to be a minority in a almost totally Black community. But I have to say, for those of us who are white, that many of us have kept our head in the sand and have not paid attention to the issue of racial injustice as much as we had to, or as we should have. Elie Wiesel once said, the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. And it is that indifference that we are now attempting to deal with in a way that we've never had before. And our hope is that all the movement and all the press that has gone on, that we really are on our way to beginning a more racially just community and society. So I'd like to begin with a couple of myths that perhaps you share. In preparing for this, I realized that I did not realize how much my own myths of raising your children to be colorblind is the way to go. That's totally an idealistic idea, but it's also very naive. We live in a society where color is recognized all the time. And the fact that if we don't talk about the racial issues, then our children don't understand what our perceptions are. And some parents think that if they don't bring up the issue about race, that their children will not learn any prejudices. But we know we don't have that luxury. Children are going to hear things at school from their friends. They're going to hear things in the community. And it's really important that, first of all, you know and are clear about your own values. And that takes some real thinking. But also, your values may be disconnected from your first reaction. Your first reaction might be more of a gut reaction, perhaps the way you were brought up. And so knowing your values is important, but also recognizing your own reactions too. And being thoughtful about your responses to other people as well as to children. For many of us, seeing how very much there was in terms of understanding the amount of anger that is going on, it's understandable anger, but we also are hopeful that people can understand where that anger comes and yet still be hopeful that in the future that we will create a better world for all children. So let me just pause for a moment. Is anything coming in and out of chat that we could address? Okay, then I'll keep talking, but please do interrupt me when you're ready. So talking to young children about this, and again, not talking is so dangerous. Children see and understand that there are people of different ethnic groups, and they ask questions, and asking them to hush is not the way to do it. It's more important to discuss why some people have darker skin than other people. But when you're talking to young children, you need to tell them the truth. And sometimes parents overtalk, and the kids start having their eyes rolling back in their head because they're getting so much information that they can't handle it. Or other times, they're just not giving them the true answer. And if you don't give your children the true answer, then they don't trust. And then they also know that this is a subject that's taboo, and they're not allowed to talk about it. And we'd rather that they talk and trust us to talk about these questions than just to continue to hide their concerns. And tomorrow when I do the puppet show, one of the puppets is really concerned about things, but afraid and hesitant to talk about it. So the answers need to be in a simple way for young children. And using books and movies are an excellent way to begin. We've provided a bunch of resources for you that I'll tell you how you can get at the end, so that you can look to see which books and movies you'd like to show your children, and preview them beforehand if that makes it more comfortable for you. But it's an excellent way to begin the discussion in the safety of your own home, and so that when the children do go out, they are prepared for asking you more questions and understanding what is going on in your community. And it's okay to tell kids you don't know the answers to everything. Especially with older children, you're going to want to work with your child to find out the answers. And the challenge is to make our children feel safe and protected while we're still telling them the truth. And this becomes incredibly complex with the police brutality that has occurred. It's especially complex for Black families who really do need to prepare their children for encounters with the police. And so it's a fine line you're walking in terms of making your children feel safe and protected while still telling the truth. Has anybody had any encounters with the situation with young children that they'd like to share with us?
I'll tell them they can send that in by chat.
Yeah, you can put it in by chat if you don't want to talk to us directly, if it's more comfortable. So has anybody had a child ask them a question about something to do with race? I know when we were first working in a school that was in a totally Black community, and one of my colleagues was white, and she was standing with a child at a water fountain, and thinking this was a teachable moment, she said to the child, well, you know, in terms of what happened before, you and I would not have been able to drink from the same water fountain. And the child looked at her and she thought he wasn't understanding that, but instead he said to her, you mean you're white? And, you know, because Pam had been so engaged with the children, they didn't notice whether she was white or Black, and it was a young child, and we just thought it was amusing that a blonde person, and he had never noticed that. But most children, even at a very young age, research has shown that from 6 months old, children can start recognizing differences and see it, that a person is either darker or lighter. And so that's important for us to know, because most kids are picking up on it. I'm not sure what was going on with this little guy, but we really enjoyed the fact that he appreciated her for who she was. So when talking to young children, I use a lot of feeling words with them. And I've put an assortment here. Children frequently will say to me that they are upset by something. That means they're angry, or it bothers them, or they're mad. But what typically happens is they get upset because things are not fair. So using the words not fair are very important with young children when you're discussing racial issues, because as we know, there has been so many things that have not been fair. And children understand fairness with an acute knowledge. For example, if you've ever accidentally given one more ice cream than the other, you'll hear the shout of not fair. And so explaining that what has happened to the Black people, it has not been fair, is a good way for young children to start a conversation. They also, other words to use of feeling tones are sad and unhappy or lonely. But for some children, and you'll see tomorrow with Coretta the Cautious, they have worries. They are cautious. They're scared or frightened. And again, it's good for them to acknowledge what those feelings are so that you can help them process them. When you're talking to young children about history, really awful to have to explain what slavery was. And it's a term that most children would not be familiar with. And so I would typically use something like, Black people were forced to work really, really hard and weren't paid for it. And the children also worked alongside their parents and did not have the same opportunities to go to school. And that's about as much as a young child needs at the beginning. And always giving them the optimistic hope that what we're doing now will make things more fair for all children, regardless of their color. When children get a little bit older, and you have an idea of whether your kids can handle this or not, but I'm talking about 8 and 10 and 12-year-olds, begin by asking them what they know and what they've heard. It's a really good introduction, and that helps them identify what their friends are telling. That helps you to know that too, but also it begins a conversation as opposed to a lecture. Again, always responding to their questions truthfully and providing a historical background whenever you can. Now, sometimes you may not know the answers to that, and it's absolutely correct to admit to them that you don't know something, but offer to learn with them. Again, there are many books and movies that have an excellent way to start the conversation. And it might be something just on a Friday night for the family to sit and watch To Kill a Mockingbird. And regardless of the various ages of your children, everybody could have some sort of insight into that movie and understanding of the very different characters in it. And of course, your older children will have much deeper questions. So where do we begin? For all of us, it's a matter of learning more. There are many resources to do, to use, especially right now. I was inundated with looking at resources that were relevant to this topic. But one of the things that I found interesting and that I experienced in planning it was how much psychic energy it takes for us to deal with this issue. Especially, I think that's why many parents have not dealt with it, particularly white parents, have not dealt with the issue of race. It takes a lot of energy just wondering, and I listened to podcasts from Black narrators and also white, and we all had the same reaction. Are we going to say something that is going to offend somebody? Are we going to offend our white neighbors, or are we going to offend our Black friends? What is the correct thing to say? And so I think we're all a little edgy right now, and appreciate knowing that each of us is trying, those of us who have open minds on the topic, to find the right words to use. But at the same time, we're going to make sense. And the reason I've always make mistakes, and the reason I always enjoyed working in the Black community, was because when I was wrong, they were very honest. And I didn't have that experience in other communities. And then we would be able to talk about what was correct and wasn't correct. For example, in our parenting program, most parenting programs use the word praise. And when we were beginning to develop the program, I had included praise. And I had a parent and a teacher, both Black, come to me and say, we don't use that word in the Black community. And so I said, okay, why not? And they said, well, praise is reserved for God, and children are expected to obey us. And I said, okay. And so we ran a focus group. Other Black parents told me, indeed, they did use the word praise with their children, and it was perfectly acceptable to include it in the program. So then we just talked to people enough to say, well, what is a word that everybody can agree upon? And we came up with acknowledgement or reinforcement, rather than using a word that was culturally upsetting to some of the parents. So learning more is essential, and learning at home and sharing that with the members of your family, with your friends. I can't imagine there are too many white people or Black people who did not respond when somebody said something culturally insensitive. And it's always a question of when you intervene and say or object to what's going on. For example, if you have an Uncle George who is very bigoted, what do you say? It's unlikely that you're going to convert Uncle George. What have you all done? Has anybody else got an Uncle George in their family? And it doesn't have to be an Uncle George. It can be anybody that you know is who's rather racist and will make insensitive and obnoxious comments. You know, and I think it often depends on the situation of where you are. If it's a situation where you're in charge of something, such as you are the teacher or the facilitator or someone in charge of the situation, you have more authority to say something. If you know that it's not going to get you anywhere, ignoring Uncle George at a home setting would seem to be an appropriate thing. But what about when you're at a PTA meeting, or when you are at a discussion with your friends' parents? Is it then a more appropriate time to say something to refute what Uncle George has said?
Diane says she responds to her cousin making racist posts on Facebook, not to convert her, but just to interrupt passive scrolling from others who see it.
I don't know if you all heard that. Why don't you say it again real loud?
I try to respond to my cousin on Facebook when she makes racist posts, not necessarily to convert her, but rather to interrupt passive scrolling from others who see it. It's a chat everyone can see.
That's an excellent way of handling it. Thank you, Diane. Anybody else? Okay, other things you can do is check out your school district's curriculum. See whether they are including history, African-American history, including some of the leaders and resources for children, such as appropriate books. And you might need to provide some of the teachers with those resources as suggestions. And then a fun thing to do is to celebrate many holidays, showing that we may not all share the same holidays, but we can enjoy each other's. Right now, libraries and museums have a tremendous amount of resources that are available by remote. And I'm thinking of the Peabody Museum of African Americans. They have many resources also, so that you can find resources to use within your community or in your own home. When I got to the point of talking about the talk, which is what Black parents call warning their children, especially their sons, about the police, I contacted one of my Black colleagues, a professor at the university, who has talked about this issue. And we discussed how difficult it is, but necessary for children, particularly Black boys, to understand about the relationship that some police have with Black children. You know, she said she lives in an affluent community that is very integrated, and still when her teenage son goes outside in a Black hoodie, she worries. And it's a luxury that those of us who are white don't understand. We wouldn't think anything of our teenage son going out wearing a Black hoodie, but for parents who have a Black son, this is a particularly vulnerable spot. And you know, do you then stop them or do you worry? But the talk is just a necessary, important part of parenting of Black children. And the advice that she gave and others that I read said, if the police stop you, do not resist them, do not argue or even negotiate, even though that's what we teach children in other settings all the time, to negotiate. Do whatever they say, make sure your hands are showing at all times, and just come home safely. And then we can deal with whatever happened at that point. But most of all, just get home safely. As I read those, I thought how fortunate I was never to have to deal with that issue with my children. And how then do you tell children about police when the community cannot trust them? So what other things might you do in your own community or home that might help to explain to children racial justice and even perhaps the history of what African Americans have experienced?
Let me read you a comment. I grew up in Appalachia and have many relatives who are ignorant to their racism. I have found that I need to first respond to them with compassion so they know I see them too. Then I try to educate them while staying reflexive of my stance as a person who left and is highly educated.
That's being respectful, just is really appropriate in the situation, but also giving another perspective, especially if you have left the community and can tell them about what you have experienced. You know, there's such a variety of living in different communities. If you are fortunate enough to live in a community where there is a great deal of ethnic diversity, it's so much easier to talk to your children because they may have a friend who is a person of color, Black or Hispanic or Asian. But for some of us who are living in communities that are almost exclusively white, it makes talking about race a little bit more complicated. And so that's when you have to turn to books and movies and being very clear about what it is that you understand about the Black community. I think when we're also thinking about what else can you do, it's good to understand your own talents. And are you good at joining the protesters and marching in peaceful demonstrations? Are you good at writing? Certainly the commenting on Facebook is a way of dealing with this. As I thought about whether to prepare this or not, I thought, and was told by one of my colleagues, who else has puppets who can handle the discussion? And I thought, this is one of my few talents. Maybe I can use it in this way. But others of you have talents. And what else can you do? If anybody's a teacher, is there anything you can bring into your classroom that brings an open discussion about race? I was fortunate to teach at NYU, and our classes were incredibly diverse. And so it was easy to get comments from the students, often painful to hear what they had experienced, but also an opportunity to have frank discussions. So something else, we hope you'll join us tomorrow for our activity session. It's at 11 o'clock on the West Coast and 2 p.m. here on the East Coast. What your children will see will be our 4 puppets. The orange one is Hilary the Hard Worker. She has she's very industrious, and she has some real plans for explaining things to you. Next to her is Gregory the Grumpy, whose attitude will show, but who is incredibly honest, and that's instructive to us. Frederico the Friendly, who's the green puppet, and then Coretta the Cautious, who's our shy puppet, who is particularly sensitive to people and who has some real concerns about what is going on and is having difficulty talking about it. And I do remember one time when I was talking to a new Black colleague, she said to me, "Gee, I'm just amazed. You can say Black comfortably. Not a lot of white people can." Well, I was so so involved in the Black community, I never even thought about it at that point. But again, it's the matter of comfort of what you've experienced and what you've seen, and how it is that you can address the issue in a way that makes everybody comfortable. And there's going to be times when it's uncomfortable, particularly when people are telling you things that happened to them or that happened to their family beforehand. There's no way one can be comfortable and hearing about George Floyd. It is a horrible, horrible experience that happened, consequence that happened to that man for absolutely no reason. And it's messy and it's uncomfortable, but that's what we're dealing with. And I think right now, best to bring those discomforts into the discussion and to get it out in the open. I cannot imagine too many Black people who can't accept you're saying to them, I'm uncomfortable with this topic. How do you feel about talking about it? We also invite you to join us. We have a listing of resources that are on our website, insightsintervention.com. It includes lots of sources of references for books that are appropriate at different developmental ages. It includes resources for you. There are podcasts, there's Sesame Street on there, and a lot of really good references, so that today's talk is not a one-time, but a deepening of your understanding of the Black community and what is going on with Black Lives Matters right now. And we're also, I've just downloaded the book by Eddie Glaude, Begin Again, Jane Bolden's America and its Urgent Lessons for Our Own Time. And I'm looking forward to reading that. We invite you to join us for a remote book discussion where we can all very comfortably ask questions of each other. I anticipate it will be a small group. So you can reach us at insightsintervention.com or at my email. And I'll ask again, Dr. Spellman, any other comments that we have? No. Okay. Anything you would like to add before I conclude this session? Peggy, again, I thank Activity Hero for being, for taking the lead on this.
Thank you, Dr. Sandee. We were really overarchingly thrilled with the support that we received. So that one comment was one of the few that we received that was on the other side. And of course, we wanted to handle it respectfully and understand that, you know, could it be word choice or how we presented it that didn't sit well. But these are the risks we take. We feel that it's worth it because we think this is a very important matter to change. And a reminder for everybody here that Dr. Sandee will be doing the puppet session tomorrow at 11 o'clock Pacific time. So that would be, you know, 2 p.m. East Coast, if you're in East Coast, 1 p.m. Central, 12 noon Mountain, you know, the same link. So the same link that got you into today's meeting will get you and your child into tomorrow's. And Dr. Sandee, do you, I guess if the child is under a certain age, do you recommend that the parent also attend, or what's your guidance on that?
I think it's a great starting point for parents to stay with their kids and see it so that they can begin a discussion afterwards. What were the puppets talking about? What did you understand? What did you not understand? What have you heard from your friends? It's meant to be a discussion starter as well as informative for children. So I do recommend parents attend it with. There's nothing in there I would hope that parents would be uncomfortable with, but just so that they can discuss it with their children. A good opener, I hope.
Great. And then just because everybody's a busy parent, roughly what amount of time should they plan for tomorrow?
It will be about a half hour max.
Okay.
There will be no chat on that one. So as we say in Insights, be thoughtful. Whoops. As we say in Insights, I messed it up. Be thoughtful, be peaceful, and take care of each other.
Give a little time for the child within you. Don't be afraid to be young and free. Undo the locks and throw away the keys, and take off your shoes and socks and run you. La, la, la.
Hi, Peggy. This is Phyllis Dickerson, and I was trying to comment, but I'm sorry, I'm a novice to this. But this was wonderful. I am Black. I have a son who I've had to give the talk. I have a granddaughter who's biracial, who is just turned 9 right around early middle of May, and this George Floyd murder was devastating to her. It was, and we are also foster parents and work with kids of all ages. I teach Sunday school for little guys, and I agree wholeheartedly that this is not something to be ignored. The kids' parents need to be aware of it. You know, your skin color should be just as much just a descriptor, just like your eye color or whatever, you know. So really enjoyed this very much. Dr. Sandee was right on, you know. Like I said, so many people this needs to be talked about. People need to be comfortable. And I even want to say that if you live in an exclusive neighborhood, you need to get out. I mean, not so much leave your home, but you know people of other color, of color. Get to know them, really get to know them, and make them part of your world, and as well as your kids, okay? Because like I said, people of color are out there, so we need to learn how to deal with them. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Phyllis. Thanks for joining and for your comment. Anyone else have some parting thoughts? Okay, well, we hope to see you at 11 o'clock a.m. Pacific time. Tomorrow, you'll see Dr. Sandee and her puppets. It will be an illuminating session for the kids. So thanks again for joining, and have a great evening.